The Tale of Annie and the Armadillo Tale, dedicated to Annie Bell Rayleigh, written by her daughter, Joan. Although Annie didn't look like most 9-year-old girls at her school with colorful dresses, silk sashes, and lace, inside she felt like a princess, just like she saw in the picture books. The sprinkle of freckles across her nose and her big round eyes matched the brown of her potato sack dresses she wore to school. Annie always had a bright smile, cheerful eyes, and full of adventure. She had everything she ever wanted, except a special friend to share her adventures with. Annie lived far away from the sounds of honking horns and people bustling in the little shops in town. Her home was nestled in the deep country with shady, looming trees, open fields to run in, and pesky, unwelcomed forest critters like armadillos that root around in their garden. With faded, peeling paint and actual dirt floors, Annie didn't see her house as old or dilapidated. She had a huge imagination, so through her eyes, she imagined her home like a castle. Her father, being the handyman he was, hammered shiny scraps of silver tin to block out the drafty wind and rain. Annie imagined the tin as a coat of armor, adding a sparkling shimmer to their small wood-framed home, just a just a stone's throw from the Trinity River. The sound of the strong, rippling river's current reminded her of a moat, keeping all the families within its border free of strangers. And just like a grand castle is surrounded by water, Annie knew the river was her family's safe sanctuary. One rainy spring morning, startled Annie awoke to a loud, gruffy bellow. Her father sounded like an angry grizzly bear, and she knew his mood had something to do with the armadillo's nightly visits. As the old wooden screen door creaked and then loudly bounced off the wooden frame, Amy's boots quickly pitter-pattered through the mud toward the chicken pen to gather the eggs needed for breakfast. She swore under her breath at the pesky armadillo that destroyed their garden time after time. Amy could see all the broken vines and knew something had to be done, or nothing would be left for market. Amy's worry about the armadillo ruining their garden slowly slipped from her mind, and the memory of Mrs. Dixon's honey silk voice calmed Annie's thoughts. Her stomach fluttered when she remembered about the special show and tell event on Friday. Annie thought about Mrs. Dixon's request. Students, bring an item that represents your family traditions, culture, or heritage. Mrs. Dixon explained there would be several awards presented to those who do well with their overall presentation, but the grand prize winner will be awarded with the final naming of their new school mascot. Annie wondered what Susan would bring. She knew it would be something magnificent. Susan was one of the girls at school with the princess dresses and pretty bows. Annie had no idea what she would bring, for she thought she didn't have anything unique to share. That evening, Annie thought about her day at school. She was grateful that Susan was always kind to her. For as long as she could remember, Annie had hoped Susan would invite her over to play after school, yet Susan never did. As Amy gazed at her reflection in the mirror, at her old, worn potato sack dress, for the first time, Annie suddenly felt different. She wondered if Susan looked at her that way. Annie decided she wanted to show something very special about her family at show and tell because she really wanted to impress Susan. At supper, Annie's mother could tell something was bothering her. Reluctantly, she told her mother about wanting to impress Susan and her classmates with something about her family, but she was at a loss as to what that might be. Annie's mother frowned, but she spoke patiently as she kneeled down to speak to Annie. Be comfortable in your own skin, Annie. When Annie wrinkled her nose and looked at her skin, her mother knew she didn't quite understand her meaning. She explained to Annie how important it is to be confident in who you are and know that it is okay to feel different than others. It is okay to look or feel different than others. Finally, Annie understood her mother was telling her to be herself and that everything would be fine. Annie was quiet as she stared in her mother's eyes. In a soft whisper, she finally stated, you don't have to be like Susan, Annie. Be yourself, and a true friend will appreciate you for you and not what you bring to show and tell. Annie needed to think. As she gazed out her window, like flashing sparklers on the 4th of July, she was fascinated by hundreds of fireflies that lit up the night sky. Mesmerized, her worries about Susan and her mother's wisdom, shared about being comfortable in her own skin, slowly faded from her mind. And right before her eyes, in a flaming blaze, Annie saw a falling star. In amazement, her eyes widened, and she made the most heartfelt wish an almost 10-year-old girl could ever wish for. Annie wished she could share her adventures with Susan, and they become friends. As she snuggled deeply into her covers and began to fall asleep, Annie happily hugged her pillow, for she knew falling stars are considered good luck. And that next morning, as predictable as a rooster's crow at the stroke of daylight, again Annie awoke to the sounds of her father, but this time he was trudging down the broken wooden steps in rhythm to the tune of their grandfather clock chiming loudly throughout the house. His work started very early, for her brothers and he needed to catch a lot of fish to fill the empty containers that she and her sister Edna would sell after school at their tavern. Like a thorny tumbleweed scratching against a piece of metal, her father's voice thundered. Without any doubt, Annie knew by the sound of his voice the pesky armadillo had rooted around and trampled what little vegetable vines they had left in their garden. As her father's fury became a distant whisper echoing over the sputter of his loud, rumbling engine, Annie bolted out of bed. The coast was clear, now that his classic blue Chevrolet had faded down the winding dirt road and completely out of sight. Annie hurriedly dressed and kissed her mother's cheek as she ran out the door to gather eggs, her daily morning chore before catching her school bus. Before the door closed, she heard her mother's reminder. Remember what I said, Annie. Be comfortable in your own skin. In the corner of her eye, Annie caught the sight of a shiny reflection on the family's old faded aluminum boat stored out by their shed. Tossing the empty egg cartons, Annie heckled, forget the eggs, I have an armadillo to catch. As she quietly crept toward the boat, she saw the armadillo dart out into the tall grass as it fled for cover. Annie knew her father would be so proud of her, and a lot less grumpy, if she caged the pesky armadillo. He would never believe the nocturnal mammal was bold enough to show itself in broad daylight. With determination like Scarlett O'Hara, Annie knew she had to act fast. Overtaken by all her tomboyish ways, Annie shook her fist up to the sky and jeered, You've seen your last sunrise, armadillo. And like a mad bull, She charged toward the round, four-legged, wobbling varmint. Like a warrior with an impenetrable shield, the armadillo did not curl itself up in a ball like she expected. On the contrary, it bravely turned in her direction and charged back towards Annie. And like a hoot owl, her head spun around in the direction of the armadillo as it darted between her legs. Startled by its unexpected behavior, Annie just couldn't believe her eyes. Without thinking, she ran as fast as she could and leaped toward the armadillo before it nestled under the outdoor shed out of reach. He landed roughly on her stomach and held her grip tightly. As she pulled up on her knees, she tugged with all her might. Snap! Like a fiddle string, Annie stumbled backwards, falling to the ground again. Dazed by all the excitement, Annie slowly uncurled her fingers and smiled to herself in disbelief. As she ran to catch her bus, she finally had something magnificent for show and tell, and she knew it would impress Susan and her classmates. With a twinkle in her eye, Mrs. Dixon greeted Annie outside the classroom door with a warm welcome and encouraging smile. As Annie settled in her desk, she noticed Susan was already in the classroom and had an enormous fancy brown box that covered her entire desk. Annie watched the clock slowly tick as her palm became sweaty with anticipation for show and tell. She took a deep breath and began to rehearse in her mind how she would present her extraordinary armadillo tale to the class. Finally, after lunch, Mrs. Dixon cleared her throat, announced it was time to clear desks, and just like that, she'd take volunteers to present first. Before Annie could raise her hand, Susan was making her way to the front of the room with her big, mysterious box. Everyone let out their breath as she revealed the felt, broad brimmed 1965 Stetson cowboy hat worn by her father. Annie was fascinated by all her talk of herding and branding cattle as she proudly ended with the hand motions her fathers used to lasso a stray calf and how the sound of his whip cracked to keep the cattle moving on the trails. Annie slowly inched her way out of her seat, and Miss Dixon winked, giving her a reassuring vote of confidence. As Annie pulled the armadillo towel from her pocket, she nervously dropped it on the floor. With a clank and a bounce toward the teacher, Mrs. Dixon's eyes widened and her chair skidded as she nervously jumped back away from the shining silver tail. Annie took a deep breath as she thought about her mother's words about being herself. As she confidently held up the armadillo's tail, the classroom erupted into wonder and astonishment. Annie finally told the story about the armadillo that was wrecking her family's garden. For the remainder of the day, Annie received notes from her classmates with more questions about her cool armadillo tail and about other critters out in the country. At the end of the day, Annie was happy when Susan was nominated Most Confident Presenter. And to her surprise, she was chosen to suggest the name of their new school mascot with a final vote from her classmates. The students cheered happily when Mrs. Dixon proudly announced their new mascot to be named the Armadillos. That night, as Annie nestled her head in her soft pillow, she realized Susan and she had more in common than she ever imagined. Susan's father and her father were both very important to food production. Susan's father used the land to feed and sell cattle, and her father used the land to grow and sell vegetables. Her father also used the river to catch and sell fresh fish. Both their fathers are essential and bring food to the tables of other families. Annie smiled when she thought about the images of her classmates in awe of her armadillo tail that day. And in that moment, She realized Susan and she were more alike than they were different. As she drifted to sleep, Annie remembered her mother's words. Be comfortable in your own skin, Annie. Annie finally truly understood what her mom meant when she talked about Annie being unique. Annie had the confidence she needed to share with her classmates and felt proud of her family. She liked being different and knew Susan already considered her a friend without the need to impress her, despite the clothes she wore and whether they played together after school or not. Annie was comfortable in her own skin. Annie Bell Rayleigh lives in a town called Liberty, Texas, and she also has a camp house on the Trinity River in the country. She wore potato sack dresses and hand me downs, but now has a wardrobe fit for a queen. As a child, she truly caught a pesky armadillo by the tail, and her daddy didn't believe her until she showed him the proof. She grew up farming and instilled in my siblings and me the joys discovered through gardening, fishing, and being out in nature. With my own eyes during my childhood, I witnessed adult Annie holding an alligator by the tail. Annie is as fierce as the character portrayed in this tale. Susan became Annie's sister in law, and they are true friends to this day.